Have you ever felt like you didn't belong, even when you followed all the rules? What happens when a simple boarding pass becomes the line between respect and discrimination? What would you do if someone saw you as a problem, not a person? This is Malik's story. If it makes you think, like, and subscribe for more. Gate C-17 wasn't crowded, but it hummed with the usual airport energy. Rolling suitcases, boarding calls, the occasional overhead announcement swallowed by white noise. Malik Shepard stood near the gate podium, backpack tight against his shoulders, one hand wrapped around the boarding pass he'd double-checked 3 times. He was 12, calm on the outside, but his fingers kept fidgeting at the edges of the folded paper like it might disappear if he blinked too long. This was his first flight alone. He had followed every rule. His mom had walked him in, helped him check in at the unaccompanied minor counter, signed the clipboard. The lanyard tag around his neck confirmed it all: name, flight, destination, and a barcode that linked to the manifest. He'd been told to wait at the gate until boarding and that someone would escort him onto the plane. So he waited, quietly, like he was told. Now it was his turn. He stepped forward. The woman behind the desk, sharp blazer, lips lined in red, name tag pinned high. Lauren McConnell didn't meet his eyes. She glanced at the pass but didn't scan it. Her expression didn't change. "Where are your parents?" Her tone sliced sharper than necessary. Malik blinked. "I'm flying alone, ma'am. I'm registered. My dad already confirmed." "I didn't ask who confirmed what," she cut in, not looking at the lanyard, not checking the screen. "We don't allow kids to wander up to the gate without supervision." "I'm not wandering," Malik said, trying to keep his voice level. "I already checked in. This is my gate." He extended the boarding pass, 2 hands polite. Lauren plucked it with 2 fingers, looked at it like it was trash, and then without hesitation tore it in half. The sound, sharp, unmistakable, cut through everything. Malik's breath caught in his chest. He stared at the torn pieces still fluttering in her hand. "There," she said flatly. "Now you'll wait while we figure out who you really are." People behind him shifted. Someone coughed. Someone else looked away. Not a single person said a word. Malik didn't cry, not yet, but he felt the silence wrap around him like cold water. He reached into his jacket pocket and gripped the letter his mom had written that morning. He didn't pull it out. He just held it, like it might be the only thing still holding him up. Malik had spent the entire week packing and repacking his backpack. Not because he didn't know what to bring. He had a checklist, labeled, prioritized, but because something about the weight of the bag made it feel real. Inside, an iPad loaded with his own coded mini-games, a pair of over-ear headphones with a cracked side, 2 packs of trail mix, and 1 folded letter from his mom that he hadn't dared to reread yet. Look out the window. The Rockies look like heaven. She'd written that on a sticky note and tucked it into a full-page hand signed with a heart. She always wrote him letters before big things: first day of school, science fairs, his first pitch in Little League. But this was different. This was a plane. Alone. A robotics camp he'd earned a partial scholarship to, the rest paid for by his dad. 2 weeks at UC San Diego with students 2, sometimes 3 years older. He'd submitted his AI project late at night with shaky hands and a comment that read, "I know I'm young, but I really want to learn." They de-accepted him. He was proud of that, and nervous, but the good kind, the kind that buzzes in your chest like something big is just ahead. He de-followed every rule, printed his pass, checked in with the agent, lanyard on, ID ready, backpack zipped. He believed in rules. He'd grown up learning that rules, when followed carefully, were a kind of armor. They kept you safe. But now, standing at gate C-17 with the torn ticket still fluttering at his feet, Malik felt something unravel. The rules hadn't protected him, not from the look on that woman's face, not from the way she didn't see a kid who loved robots who just wanted a window seat. She saw something else, something worth stopping, and suddenly that backpack didn't feel like armor anymore. It just felt heavy. He didn't mean to remember it, but the memory slid in anyway, like a draft through a cracked window. Malik was 7. The store smelled like floor wax and popcorn. He and his mom had stopped at the electronics aisle so he could look at the robot kits, The kind they couldn't afford, but he always liked to examine, memorizing the specs, pretending he'd get one for Christmas. She'd let him wander a few steps ahead, just one aisle over. He never left her line of sight. But someone else had been watching. The security guard wasn't loud. He didn't accuse or shout, just followed, step by step, slow and certain. His mom noticed first. She turned, her mouth a straight line. "Come here, baby," she said, soft but sharp. He came. She took his hand. The guard kept walking past them, but not really. His eyes lingered. Outside, Malik had asked her what happened. Why the man kept looking at him like he did something wrong. She had crouched down so they were eye level, brushed a curl from his forehead. "You didn't do anything wrong, baby. Some people see the wrong thing because that's what they're looking for." His little hands had fidgeted with the hem of his shirt. "So what do I do?" Her answer came quick, firm. "You don't have to prove anything, just stay kind, stay clear. Let the truth speak louder than their fear." Back then, it had made him feel safe. Like there was a way to stay untouchable if you just followed the invisible rules. But now, standing under fluorescent lights at gate C-17, that lesson felt fragile. He was kind, he was clear, and still he was being treated like a problem, like a lie. The humiliation didn't scream. It whispered, slipped beneath his skin and curled there. He wasn't scared of flying. He was scared of disappearing right in front of people's eyes, and no one caring enough to say they saw it happen. The silence at gate C-17 had stretched so long it started to feel like a wall. Malik still hadn't moved, still holding the lanyard around his neck like it might vouch for him if he held it tight enough. The torn ticket pieces remained in Lauren's hand, limp now, like even she didn't know what to do with them. Then came the voice, calm, even, but with a weight that bent the air around it. "Is there a reason my son hasn't boarded?" Heads turned. The gate agent beside Lauren straightened. Even the TSA officer shifted. Malik did too, toward the voice, toward the man walking steadily toward the podium in a slate gray jacket, collar open over a white button-down. No badge, no briefcase, but authority wrapped around his posture like a second coat. Isaiah Shepard. Lauren's eyes narrowed. "Sir, this is a secure gate." "I'm aware," Isaiah said gently. He didn't look at her, he looked at Malik. "You okay?" Malik's voice barely made it out. "She tore up my ticket." Isaiah finally turned to Lauren. "Did you scan his name?" Well, he didn't have ID," she said quickly. "And there was no guardian present, it seemed off." Isaiah's voice didn't change. "So you didn't scan his name, didn't check the barcode tag on his lanyard, didn't look at the manifest or the unaccompanied minor list?" Lauren's mouth opened, but nothing came out. Isaiah turned slightly. "Evan, right?" The younger flight attendant stepped forward. "Yes, sir. Malik checked in with me an hour ago. I verified his documentation and flagged his record. Everything was in order." Isaiah nodded once, almost like a quiet thanks. Then he faced Lauren again. "You didn't follow the wrong procedure," he said softly. "You followed your assumption." The air crackled, not loud but undeniable. Lauren stiffened. "I was protecting flight integrity. We have to be alert for forged tickets and what part of my son made you suspicious?" Isaiah asked. His tone didn't rise, it didn't need to. Lauren's mouth flattened. Behind them, a gate monitor refreshed. Flight 407 to San Diego, on time, but nothing felt on time now. Because a moment had split, and people had started to notice. Malik stood there, hands still gripping the torn edges of his boarding pass, the weight of the moment pressing down on him. Lauren's glare was sharp, but it didn't matter anymore. Her authority was slipping fast. Then a voice from across the room. "I saw him," a woman said, standing from her seat. "He was respectful. He handed her his ticket, no fuss. I didn't hear him raise his voice once." The room seemed to inhale, collective breaths held as the woman took a step closer to the gate. People shifted uneasily in their seats. Malik glanced up, surprised. He hadn't noticed her before, but now her presence felt like a small crack in the wall that had been closing in on him. Someone else chimed in, quieter but firm. "Yeah, this feels wrong." A murmur of agreement rippled through the waiting area, voices growing louder but still restrained. It wasn't anger, not yet, but it was enough. Enough for Lauren to feel the pressure building, enough for her to see that people were starting to look at her, not Malik. From the corner of the gate, the soft click of shoes against the floor grew louder. Miguel Santos, the supervisor, appeared at the edge of the crowd, his eyes scanning the scene. His gaze flicked from Lauren to Malik, then to the passengers around them, weighing the atmosphere before he spoke. "Lauren," he said, voice calm but commanding, "I need to review the security footage. Now." Lauren stiffened. Her shoulders tensed, and for the first time she looked unsure. Her posture faltered just for a moment, but it was enough to show her that the ground beneath her wasn't as solid as she thought. The flight was smooth, almost too smooth. The hum of the engines, the soft clink of the overhead bins as they settled, and the distant murmur of other passengers slowly fading into the background. But for Malik, the stillness of the cabin only made the knot in his chest feel heavier. He leaned against the window, staring out at the endless sky. The city below had already vanished into patches of light and shadow, swallowed by the clouds. But he didn't see that. Not really. He was still standing at gate C-17, still watching the torn edges of his ticket float through the air. It was quiet for a while, long enough that Malik almost forgot to ask. "Dad," he said, his voice softer than usual but steady. "Why did she look at me like I wasn't supposed to be here?" Isaiah's gaze never wavered. He'd been watching Malik, his son, with a calm that seemed unshakable, but now the weight of the question hung between them. "Because she saw what she wanted to see," Isaiah said, his voice even, like he was stating something simple but profound. "She saw a kid who didn't belong even before you spoke. That's what people do sometimes, look for what confirms their ideas. It's easier than seeing what's really there." Malik didn't say anything for a long time. His eyes were still fixed on the clouds, but his mind was miles away, searching for something, anything, that made sense of it all. He felt the sting again, but it wasn't the same. Not as sharp, not as raw, it was just tired. "I don't want revenge," Malik finally said, his voice barely above a whisper. "I just want to understand." Isaiah nodded. "I know, son, I know." Malik unfolded the letter from his mom. It was creased now from how tightly he'd held it. Her words still felt like an anchor, even after all that had happened. "Look out the window, the Rockies look like heaven." He read it again, slower this time, letting the words wash over him like a quiet comfort. As the mountains began to emerge in the distance, their peaks dusted with snow, Malik pressed his forehead gently against the cold window. The sight was breathtaking, just like his mom had said, but something else lingered in his chest, something tender, something heavy. Isaiah leaned over and placed a hand on his son's shoulder. When Malik looked up, his dad smiled. It wasn't a smile that answered everything. It was a smile that held everything. "You're more beautiful than anything out there," Isaiah said softly, "and that's not something anyone can take from you." Malik nodded, feeling the weight of it settle into his bones, like the promise of a new beginning. By the time the plane leveled off, the tension from the gate seemed like a distant memory. Malik sat back in his seat, his fingers tapping absent-mindedly on the armrest, his thoughts still circling around the moment that had almost defined his whole trip. But as the flight took its course, a quiet ripple of change began to spread, not just in his own mind, but in the world outside the plane. Isaiah had never been one for grand gestures. But the way he handled things, calmly, decisively, spoke volumes. A few hours after the flight was in the air, a message from his assistant appeared on his phone. "Evan Liu has been thanked personally for his honesty." Isaiah smiled slightly. He hadn't expected Evan to stand up for Malik so directly, but in the quiet way he had, it made all the difference. Integrity, Isaiah knew, wasn't just about following the rules. It was about having the courage to do what was right when it mattered. Then came another message. "Miguel Santos has informed me that Lauren McConnell has been placed on leave pending review." Isaiah's fingers hovered over the screen before he set the phone down. The ripple was small, but it was a start. The consequences were already unfolding. By the time they landed in San Diego, Isaiah had already sent a memo to his executive board. Initiate retraining across all terminals. Focus on bias recognition, de-escalation techniques, and youth passenger engagement. It wasn't about one person. It was about making sure nothing like this would happen again. The day after his arrival, Pacific Spirit Airways sent out an official notice to all employees. Effective Monday, new bias awareness training for all staff across all terminals. Focus on inclusive passenger engagement, especially with unaccompanied minors. Isaiah knew this wasn't a fix, not by a long shot, but it was a step, a moment to hit pause, to ask difficult questions, and to finally start making real changes. The ripple had only begun, but as he looked out the plane window one last time, the future felt a little clearer. And for the first time in a while, Isaiah allowed himself to feel something close to hope. The call came in the late afternoon, just as Isaiah was sitting at his desk, reviewing the day's emails. The familiar ringtone of Malik's camp number made his heart light. "Hey, Dad," Malik said, his voice bright but carrying that little edge of mischief Isaiah knew so well. "I flew the drone into a tree. It still counts, right?" Isaiah chuckled softly. "I'm sure it does, son. That's how you learn." "Yeah, well, it was a really good drone until it hit the tree," Malik added, sounding more amused by the disaster than anything else. "But at least I know how not to fly it now." Isaiah smiled, leaning back in his chair, his fingers absently tracing the edge of the torn boarding pass still in his coat pocket. He hadn't let go of it. The tattered paper felt like a reminder of everything that had happened, a reminder of what his son had faced and how far they still had to go. "I also did something else," Malik said, his voice shifting just a little. "I drew Lauren." Isaiah paused, surprised. "Lauren, the gate agent." "Yeah, I didn't draw her mad or anything," Malik said. "I just drew her like a regular person behind a desk, and I wrote on the glass window, 'Do better.'" Isaiah's breath caught slightly. For a moment, the weight of those words settled between them, words that weren't about anger or revenge, just an acknowledgement of the need for change. "That's a good drawing," Isaiah whispered. There was a silence on the other end of the line, just long enough for both of them to breathe. Finally, Malik spoke again, softer now. "Dad, do you think she'll ever get it?" Isaiah didn't answer right away. Instead, he turned his gaze out the window, staring at the city below, far away but close enough to feel the pulse of it all. "There are no lanes in the sky," he said quietly, the words coming as naturally as breathing, "but people still build barriers. Our job is to break them, one flight at a time." Malik's voice was thoughtful. "Yeah, one flight at a time." They both fell into a comfortable silence, one that felt like resolution without needing to say more. The world would keep turning, but for now they had made their mark, and that was enough.